Anna Adamo, a longtime babysitter, she's accused of poisoning an 11-month-old with antifreeze. And now, newly obtained court documents suggest this might not have been her first time. We are going to break down what detectives uncovered from alleged chilling evidence in her garage to a shocking apparent history that stretches back years. And we are going to do it all with insight from a former prosecutor. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. This is the kind of story that makes every parent's stomach drop. You have this trusted babysitter who is accused of poisoning a baby in her care with antifreeze. I wish I was making it up. I wish this wasn't the title, but that is the allegations, what we're talking about. So according to investigators, the baby was perfectly healthy in the morning, but by the afternoon, doctors were fighting to keep this child alive. And now, a newly obtained affidavit lays out what detectives say happened inside that babysitter's house and what they found in the garage. Now, here's the part that's going to stop you in your tracks. This may not be the first time this babysitter has been involved in a suspected poisoning incident, because buried in court documents is a reference to another child years ago who apparently ended up in the hospital under eerily similar circumstances. And I want you to wait until you hear what investigators uncovered and how they say that history might just be repeating itself. Now, before we dive into what's inside the wild affidavit, we got to rewind and start from the top. We're talking about 59-year-old Anna Adamo, this longtime babysitter, again, out in Okeechobee, Florida. It's a small, quiet town about 70 miles northwest of Palm Beach. And on the morning of February 12, 2025, a mother had dropped off her 11-month-old baby boy at Adamo's home at around 9:30 a.m. Before heading out, she breastfed him, handed over milk and baby food for the day, and throughout the morning, everything seemed normal. The mom, the babysitter, Adamo, they texted back and forth, just, little check-ins to make sure that he was okay. And then at around 2:25 that afternoon, Adamo texted saying the baby seemed tired and asked if she could lay him down for a nap. The mom said, sure, right? No reason to think anything was wrong. But about an hour later, at around 3:30 p.m., the baby's grandmother arrived at Adamo's house to pick him up. But something wasn't right. That little boy was unusually sleepy. He didn't wake up when she moved him to his car seat. He didn't lift his head. He barely stirred. And the grandma figured maybe he was, teething or overtired. But over the next couple of hours, that's when things got really bad. When this baby's mother met up with her own mother later that afternoon, she noticed something was wrong. Her son looked lethargic. He was floppy. He was unresponsive. And then while they were driving, he suddenly started vomiting. So panicked, the mom called her husband. He told her to get the baby to the hospital immediately. They raced to the HCA Rollerson Medical Center in Okeechobee, where doctors first thought it could be a bad flu, maybe pneumonia. But as the baby's condition worsened, he was transferred to Lawnwood Medical Center in Fort Pierce, and then moved again to Nicholas Children's Hospital in Miami, where he was placed on life support. And during those terrifying hours, doctors ran test after test, and all of them were negative. But then something happened. His urine test showed something rare: oxidized crystals, which is a telltale sign of ethylene glycol poisoning. In plain terms, it's antifreeze poisoning. This little boy ended up suffering a full cardiac arrest. Doctors had to perform CPR on him for 10 minutes. Now, here's the miracle. He survived. He survived, thankfully. Once the hospital made that antifreeze connection, once they saw what was going on, that's when they contacted the local police department. And this kicked off what would become an 8-month investigation where detectives interviewed Adamo, her husband, and also investigators ended up making a chilling apparent discovery inside Adamo's garage. We are going to get into those details, but after interviewing the grandparents and making the discovery in the garage, that is when investigators brought in a toxicology expert who determined that the poisoning would have had to have happened while the baby was in Adamo's care. And so you fast forward 8 months, police, they track Adamo down in Valdosta, Georgia, where she'd apparently been staying. She was arrested on October 3rd, extradited back to Florida to face charges of attempted first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, poisoning a child with a liquid substance. She was booked into the Okeechobee County Jail on a $600,000 bond, which she later posted. And now we got to talk about what's happening now. Obviously, this is a story that we wanted to bring to you. And the reason that we can do this is not only because of the amazing support that we get from all of you out there, and thank you so much for that, but also from our incredible sponsor, Upside. Now, this is the free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries, food. I pump my gas, I can use Upside. I go out to lunch, I can use Upside. I get something from a convenience store, I can use Upside. And why wouldn't I want to get cash back when I do all these things, right? This is actual, real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. So once you have the free Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. You follow the steps on the app, you get paid. To find out how much you can earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen. But make sure to use our promo code Sidebar because you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. All right, so we're going to break down this affidavit. We're going to look at what investigators determined to be contradictions or alleged contradictions in Adamo's story. And to help us do that, I want to bring on a special guest. We're joined once again by practice professor of law and former prosecutor Marian Braccia. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's always good to see you. Let's start here. From your experience, what are the most critical steps that law enforcement prosecutors, they have to take in a case where a young child is suspected of being poisoned? Is it the timeline? Is it the intent? Talk to us about it.
Yeah, I think the two things that you mentioned are super important, the timeline, the intent, but also a major question in a case like this would be access to the child. So who was in contact with the child, who was supposed to be supervising the child, who else besides this caregiver could have possibly had access to this child. So those are really the questions when a child isn't able to testify on their own behalf, to testify about their recollections and their experiences about what would have or could have led to this injury.
And when you have an alleged victim who's so young, so defenseless, so vulnerable, there's only limited options in terms of, or limited counter arguments or defenses that can be presented about what may have happened here. When you talk about toxicology, does this come down to a battle of the experts at times? And I wonder, what would a defense expert say, that this wasn't antifreeze poisoning and suggest that it was something else?
Well, there's always the question about the genetic disorder, the autoimmune disorder. I realized that the testing came back negative in that regard. A defense expert might question the validity of that negative genetic testing. But I think more than the expert testimony or the testimony regarding the toxicology results would be the availability of this substance to anybody but the babysitter, anybody but the charged defendant in this case. So was there access to antifreeze or a similar substance with a similar isotope in it from anywhere else? Could the child have gotten into this at his parents' home, in the grandmother's car, at some other location? And so really the question is a reasonable doubt question. Was this babysitter's home the only place and the only period during which this child could have ingested this antifreeze or been given this antifreeze to have caused this significant injury?
Let's explore this a little bit. So this affidavit, and I will tell you right now, it is disturbing, okay, but it is an important piece of information here. And it starts right where the investigation did. The moment that detectives realized that this wasn't just a medical emergency, but an alleged deliberate act. It reads, on February 12, 2025, Anna Adamo did, with malice and forethought, commit aggravated child abuse by poisoning a toddler months old with antifreeze, and that the child was provided to Anna Adamo at 9:30 a.m. in perfect health, and at 3:30 p.m. the child was suffering from the effects of ethylene glycol antifreeze poisoning as diagnosed by medical doctors. This resulted in great bodily injury and the child being admitted into 3 different Florida hospitals in treatment that required life support and CPR. The amount of damage to the child's renal system is yet to be determined. And the report says that the baby's mother told detectives that her son had been healthy that morning, that she'd left 2 3.5-ounce bottles of breast milk, both labeled, packed, along with solid food. But later, Adamo texted that she only fed him a 1-ounce bottle at 11 a.m., which really doesn't make sense, the affidavit notes. This was odd as the mother did not supply a 1-ounce bottle, and according to the log, the child was asleep from 10:10 a.m. to 11:55 a.m. By that afternoon, the affidavit states, when the child was transported from one car seat to the next, he was lethargic, unalert, and not able to hold his head up, and described as floppy. While traveling in the car, the child began to vomit a clear, sticky, odd-smelling vomit. The vomit was not normal in that it was clear, unusually smelly, and sticky. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors determined the presence of the crystals in his urine, and this is when detectives began to turn their attention to Adamo. According to the affidavit, a search warrant was obtained obtained to search the residence of Anna Adamo at 1115 Southeast 11th Street. Seized during the search were several baby bottles, several rubber nipples for baby bottles, pediatric medication, toys, swabs, and 2 jugs of antifreeze, one unopened at 148.6 ounces, one opened at 121.8 ounces. Detectives then say it should be noted that there is about 2 3/4 cups of antifreeze missing from the open jug. Now, Professor, first thing I wonder is, can they prove when that was opened? You know, maybe it was used for something else.
Right, exactly. So, and I believe the antifreeze was found in a garage, which is where we would anticipate antifreeze being stored and used. So I don't think there's any way to ascertain when it was opened or used. I believe there was also some forensic testing done on the antifreeze bottles to find DNA or fingerprints, which was also negative. So unfortunately, I think the prosecution is going to have a tough time pinning the actual use or the opening of the bottle on this particular defendant at a particular day or at a particular time.
But you can see how that message about feeding him and what the mother says, where we talked about before, perhaps the child accidentally ingested something, the defendant's own actions, and we will get into that, the defendant's own alleged actions, statements, that's what makes this a case where investigators say, wait a minute, this might be a deliberate act.
Sure. And of course, the defendant's statements would be admissible by the prosecution. Any communication that the defendant had before her arrest with the child's parents, with the child's grandmother, anything that she said can, of course, be used against her. It's considered a party opponent admission. I think that the defense might be, well, the child only ingested 1 ounce of breast milk, perhaps because he was already suffering the effects of antifreeze poisoning from some other source. That I would anticipate is the defense, that when he arrived at the house, even though the report was that he was in perfect health, that perhaps the effects of antifreeze poisoning from someone else or from some other house hadn't quite kicked in yet. And so he wasn't able to ingest the same amount of breast milk as was usual for him or would be expected.
So the affidavit lists these multiple items in the home that were apparently seized, right? The bottles, the nipples, the pediatric medication, the toys, alongside the antifreeze. Aside from the antifreeze, what is the significance of these other items? What kind of testing or analysis do you think is being done? Why are they important?
Sure. So I think swabs and chemical testing is being done on those bottles as well. The bottles, the nipples, the medicine, the toys, to see if there is the presence of antifreeze, to see if that is how antifreeze was communicated, was given to the child. From my reading, my understanding is that the chemical testing done on the bottles and the nipples was also negative. So I'm not sure that they have been able to link any of those baby products with the antifreeze that was found in the home.
Here's the problem. Okay, this is where I think, again, the idea of what she said, what she did, allegedly, that is where I think this becomes problematic for the defense. So, investigators apparently interviewed her, Adamo, and she allegedly denied ever taking the baby into the garage where the antifreeze was, claimed that no other adults were in the home that day. The problem is, her husband's statement, surveillance video, apparently told a different story. The affidavit reads, in interview, Anna Adamo claims that her husband did not come home for lunch during the day. Mr. Adamo claims that he did come home for lunch. It was confirmed through the community gate surveillance that Mr. Adamo had entered the community around lunchtime. And detectives also specifically noted Ms. Adamo never showed any concern for the welfare of the child during the investigation. Now, how significant are these cases, Professor, when you're talking about discrepancies in building a case for intent? Because, again, that is the key here.
Sure. Well, if we're talking about the defendant's credibility, that is a major issue for her. And there is, of course, a concept of false in one, false in all. So if she would lie or misstate one important fact, then why wouldn't she lie or misstate other important facts or all important facts having to do with this case? So there is that theory. It is going to be a question for the trial judge pre-trial as to whether or not any of the defendant's statements to the police once she was under arrest would be admissible, because I believe she expressed a preference to stop the interview. And so the question is going to be whether any of her statements that she made before she wanted to go off the record or stop speaking with police would be admissible against her.
Now, I mentioned earlier that detectives had consulted with an expert in this case. This was Dr. Bruce Goldberg, a professor, former chief of the Division of Forensic Medicine in the Department of Pathology, Immunology, and Laboratory Medicine in the College of Medicine at the University of Florida. Dr. Goldberger explained, per the affidavit, that, quote, "A lethal dose in a child is not very large, but a tablespoon would be intoxicating. It is metabolized by the body and changes into oxalate, which causes crystals in the kidneys. The crystals are unique to this condition. If overdosed on it, it will cause cessation of kidney function, and the child must be tested for that. The visible effects will be fatigue, lethargy, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. The effects of the poison would take 1 to 2 hours. And the time for the effects to set in is what led Dr. Goldberger to conclude that the child must have been poisoned the same day he was taken to the hospital." Professor, when you hear that, and you're talking about a very specific timeline, a very specific metabolic pathway, how important is testimony like this going to be?
Absolutely. It's hugely important. And I'm not sure, once again, that the defense would have any argument that there was this substance that was ingested by the child. I think that the question is going to be, so how was it administered? How was it given to the child? How did he get access to it? How did he manage to ingest it? Was it an intentional administration? Was it accidental? Was there failure to supervise? So that really is the question, I think, for both the prosecution and the defense in their strategy moving forward. But the timeline is, of course, important. I could also envision a world where the defense says, well, the child took that nap between 10 or 10:10 and 11:50. So that lethargy, that fatigue had kicked in at that point, which means that perhaps the administration or the ingestion of the antifreeze was before he'd been dropped off. So as we've been saying, that timeline is super important. And each side, I think, will have a theory as to how the timeline either helps or hurts, helps their case or hurts their opponent's case.
Now, if this was just a complete one-off, a complete first-time allegation, never heard anything like this again, obviously that's not the strongest case that the prosecution could have. This is where we take a turn, okay? Because the question investigators may be asking is, was this the first time, if they believe she did this deliberately? Was this the first time, or had it happened before? Well, this is when the report then adds a chilling detail, something detectives uncovered while reviewing Adamo's past. Quote, on February 28th, 2014, an OCSO deputy arrived in reference to a DCF complaint. The DCF report stated a 6-month-old child was taken to the hospital for being lethargic, and it was later determined the child could have been poisoned with a household cleaner or antifreeze. The victim's mother reported that her child was being cared for by Anna Adamo, suspect, 2 days a week. The mother stated that the suspect was watching the child on February 24, 2014. While Mrs. Adamo was not charged, evidence supports Mrs. Adamo used antifreeze to poison that child in 2014. In a newly reviewed 2014 incident report obtained by WPBF sheds even more light on this. The outlet reported, quote, that the responding physician did have a slight concern that the juvenile had been poisoned, but more tests had to be performed outside the lab to determine this. And after the child's condition briefly improved, Dr. DeWitt, in this case, discharged him, ordered blood work, but then Dr. DeWitt said after receiving the results, his suspicion was raised even more that the juvenile could have been poisoned. At this time, Dr. DeWitt made a report with DCF and law enforcement in West Palm Beach. And when Adamo was asked about the prior accusations, the affidavit indicates she did confirm it, but she brushed it off, saying the child was found to have some sort of disease. Professor, can prosecutors introduce this?
Well, my quintessential law professor answer, of course, as you know, is it depends. It will come down to a ruling pre-trial by a judge, likely the trial judge at a motion in limine, where the defense will argue to preclude any mention of this prior incident from 2014. And of course, the prosecution will want to introduce this incident. There is one specific rule of evidence that governs the admissibility of other act evidence. Most states have the same numbers in their rules. So this is really a question as to whether the plan or intent or preparation or state of mind of the defendant can be proved in this case by using evidence from that 2014 incident. The question is going to be whether that evidence of that 2014 incident is unduly prejudicial. If its prejudicial effect substantially outweighs its probative value or any proof value that it has in the instant case. So that is really going to be a judge's call pre-trial, and that very well might dictate the direction of this case.
Do you think it's interesting that if this is true, she's essentially minimized what happened? Or I think there's an argument that she minimized what happened?
Again, I think if that statement comes in, if the fact finder, if the jury is permitted to hear that she said that or minimize that prior occasion, I think that goes a long way against her credibility and certainly perhaps even against her likability as a defendant, as a client. But it'll be, I think, another suppression issue, a question pre-trial, whether her statements at that point are even admissible.
So I have to talk about something else in this case when we talk about prior episodes, and it is really, really alarming. Now, for most people, this case is completely shocking. I say that, but apparently for one man, this was a confirmation of sorts. Who am I talking about? Anna Adamo's son, Aiden, now an adult, told CBS 12 he actually felt joyous when he heard that his mother was arrested. He described this childhood of fear and confusion, claiming that when he was just 10 or 11 years old, his mother began planting dangerous items like lighters and knives and razor blades on him, and then, quote, catching him with them. And those accusations, he says, led to involuntary therapy, hospitalizations, involuntary arrests. He told the outlet, every day I woke up between the ages of 11 and 14, just dreading the day ahead, terrified of this woman and just so beyond frustrated that no one would listen to me. He reportedly even called her a monster, went on to say, she should be in prison. I am glad that there is something in place to prevent her from watching children until she's convicted. And Aiden also posted about his experience on Facebook, saying in part, quote, this woman is wicked, vile, manipulative, and very deserving of all past, present, and future allegations, and I'm done staying quiet about it to appease the family members that still somehow are desperate to defend her. And just to be clear, Adamo is not accused of any wrongdoing, hasn't been charged with anything related to Aiden's allegations. But, Professor, I do wonder, you think investigators have interviewed him? Do you think prosecutors have interviewed him? Will he play a role in this or not really? I mean, again, maybe if she's convicted and during sentencing, this could come up, but I wonder if it's going to be relevant or perhaps prejudicial to the case at hand.
Yeah, I think that it is, important background information, and I think that it's information that the investigators and the prosecutors would be interested to have and interested to hear. Again, Jesse, it's important to note that, there's that famous line from A Few Good Men, the Tom Cruise movie. It doesn't matter what I know, it only matters what I can prove. And so the rules of evidence and the rules of court conduct really do dictate how evidence is presented and what evidence is presented to a fact finder. So in this particular case, what Adamo's son is expressing are a series of past events, a series of other acts potentially that might be deemed unduly prejudicial and irrelevant to the instant prosecution. So it'll come down to a judge's ruling as to whether or not that witness would even be permitted to testify. It sounds to me at first blush like it's character testimony, and that is something that we are cautious of in the American legal system because we want to proceed on cases, we prosecute cases based on the facts of individual cases, individual events, not based on who you are as a person. That goes against what our whole philosophical system is.
100%. Okay. Disturbing allegations, but I'm glad you kind of weeded us through the legal process and the legal issues because it can get a bit complicated and people might assume everything might be coming in and everything's part of the legal case when that might not be the situation. And obviously there are two perspectives of this. But again, just disturbing and thankfully the baby survived this. I think that's the number one takeaway from all of it. Professor Marian Braccia, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll see you next time.